What is up, guys? We are back with another video, and today we're checking out a motherboard that's probably one of the most popular X570 motherboards out there, and one that you guys have requested us do a video on for a while now. So we finally got our hands on it. It is the ASUS ROG Crosshair VIII Hero. So let's go ahead and take a look. To start things off, this is a standard ATX motherboard, and ASUS has gone with a matte black PCB with black accents. So all of the heatsinks on the board are black, but there is a silver streak that goes across the IO cover and heatsinks on the bottom of the board. Overall, I think this board looks quite good. Starting at the CPU socket, we of course have AMD's AM4 socket, and X570 motherboards will support both second and third generation AMD Ryzen processors. Around the CPU socket, we have the power delivery components, which are made up of the IR3555 power IR stage MOSFETs, microfine alloy chokes, and 10K Japanese made black metallic capacitors. ASUS is making use of a 7+1 power phase design, where there are two power stages for each V-core phase. Since each power stage is 60 amps, each V-core phase has 120 amps, so in total you have a V-core output of 840 amps. This means that this board is definitely made for LN2 overclocking. Another thing that we noticed is there is actually a small hole in the center of the CPU socket. This is to install a thermal probe. At the top corner of the board, you'll find an 8-pin EPS connector plus an extra 4-pin. The 8-pin is metal reinforced, and again, since ASUS has designed this board with LN2 overclocking in mind, it's good to see the extra 4-pin. Moving over to the opposite corner of the board, you'll find three 4-pin headers and a postcode display. The headers are for the CPU optional fan, your CPU fan, and an AIO pump. Coming over to the memory slots, there are 4 DDR4 DIMM slots, which support memory all the way up to 4800 MHz. These slots do not have the locks on the bottom, which actually makes it easier to swap out memory once you have your graphics card installed. Along the edge of the board, you'll find a 4-pin RGB header, 3-pin addressable RGB header, large power button, smaller reset button, 24-pin ATX power connection, voltage checkpoints, and a USB 3.2 Gen 2 header. Moving down the board, you'll find a 4-pin fan header, a USB 3.2 Gen 1 header, 8 SATA 6 gig ports, and another 4-pin fan header. And then finally, at the bottom of the board is of course where you'll find the rest of your headers and connections. So from left to right, you have your HD audio headers, 4-pin fan header, LN2 mode header, safe boot button, retry button, TPM header, 4-pin RGB header, 3-pin addressable RGB header, node header, 2 USB 2.0 headers, a slow mode switch, your front panel headers, and then finally another 4-pin fan header. The audio components are located on the bottom left corner of the board, and ASUS is making use of their Supreme FX 8-channel high-definition audio codec. Most of the audio portion of the board is covered by the dust shield. The bottom half of the motherboard is characterized by a large heatsink. Unlike the ASUS ROG X570 Taichi that we reviewed recently, which had a single heatsink, this section is actually 3 separate heatsinks. So you have one on the chipset with an active cooling fan, and then you have one on each of the 2 M.2 slots. The first M.2 slot sits above the top PCI Express slot, while the second sits towards the bottom of the board between the second and third PCI Express slots. The top slot supports your standard 80mm M.2 SSDs, while the bottom supports larger 110mm drives. When it comes to expansion slots, this board offers 3 PCI Express 4.0 x16 slots and a single PCI Express 4.0 x1 slot. The first 2 x16 slots are metal reinforced. The rear I/O of this board has a very nice cover which says Crosshair VIII Hero on it, and the Hero part will actually light up with RGB lighting, which we'll show you here in just a little bit. Of course, we have an integrated I/O shield as well, and when it comes to the rear I/O from left to right, you have clear CMOS and BIOS flashback buttons, your Wi-Fi antennas, 4 USB 3.1 Gen 1 ports, 7 USB 3.2 Gen 2 ports, a USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C port, 2 Ethernet ports, and your audio connections, which do include an optical out. For those wondering, the red Ethernet port is 2.5 gig and powered by the Realtek RTL 8125CG controller, and the Wi-Fi is powered by the Intel Wi-Fi 6 AX200 controller. For RGB lighting on the board, you of course have the Hero section on the rear I/O cover, and then there's an ROG logo on the chipset heatsink that lights up as well. There's two things that I really like about the RGB lighting on this board. First is that it's not overpowering or super bright, and then secondly is that ASUS designed the ROG logo to sit below where you have your graphics card once it's installed so that it won't be covered up. Alright guys, so once again we have another amazing ROG Crosshair motherboard. ASUS has always made a big deal about this board. It's usually their flagship board or one of their higher end boards for whatever chipset we're talking about. Of course, we're on X570 now, and when it comes to X570, this ticks all the boxes, plus gives you so many other things that you just won't find on other motherboards. So with this motherboard, you get like the safe boot button, which again, you don't find on other motherboards. You get flow headers for, custom water cooling loops, which again, you won't find on other motherboards. You have an AIO pump. So if you're running an AIO, you have a dedicated header for your AIO. You have so many things that again, just aren't found on other motherboards. And this is one of the only, I would say, X570 motherboards that's actually really specifically made for LN2 overclocking. So if you're an extreme overclocker, this is definitely a board that you're gonna be looking at. First, you have a VRM capable of 840 amps of total output. So that's quite a lot. So if you're thinking of getting a 3950X and throwing it on here, you shouldn't have any problems there. And most motherboards that we've looked at so far, they're only around 600 amps. So you have quite a lot of power there. You do have the extra 4-pin up here to bring even more power into the CPU. You have your LN2 header, and what that does is when you enable that sets some preset LN2 settings in the BIOS, so you don't have to do that manually. And of course, you have the little hole right here in the CPU socket, so you can throw a thermal probe up in there. Now, for all of us regular people who aren't going to be doing LN2 overclocking, this is a fully featured X570 motherboard. It's going to have everything that you want, plus a whole lot more. So you do get Wi-Fi 6 or 802.11ax on this board, which we've seen on a lot of X570 motherboards. You get USB 3.2 Gen 2 support, and this motherboard is loaded. I mean loaded with USB ports. I believe there are 12 here on the back, and then you have 4 headers on the board itself. So if you're somebody who's, connecting a lot of USB devices, you definitely have everything covered here. You do have BIOS reset and clear CMOS buttons on the back. And the rear I/O does have a cover, and that's something that ASUS pretty much has pioneered, so you're definitely seeing it on this board. You of course have your RGB lighting, and the RGB lighting is very good. It's not super bright, which I actually like. We've seen these motherboards with crazy RGB lighting, but just like it's more subtle, and I actually really like it quite a lot. But yeah, this board has everything. It's going to give you everything that you want, plus a ton of extras. And of course, if you are doing LN2 overclocking, this is one of the few boards that's really set up for that. So you have all of that stuff together, plus a ton of things that I didn't mention. So definitely check the link below for our full written review on this motherboard. If you have any questions about this board, go ahead and leave it in the comment section below. So until next time, catch you guys later.